Now, this is the kind of report that actually matters because it tells you the frustration was not just coming from fans watching the offense every week and wondering why everything looked harder than it needed to be. When a report comes out saying Steelers higher ups were not happy with the playing time and production from Pat Freiermuth, that is not some random little note you just scroll past. That is the front office basically looking at the offense and saying, wait a second, we paid this guy. We believe he is part of the core. We extended him like someone who is supposed to have a real role. And then the actual usage did not match the investment at all. That is the real story here. This is not about pretending Pat is some unstoppable tight end that changes the entire league by himself. Nobody is saying that. But the Steelers paid him to be more than a background character. They paid him to be a steady, dependable piece of the passing game, the kind of player who can help a quarterback stay on schedule, keep the offense out of third and forever, and give you a real answer in the middle of the field. And that is exactly why this whole thing felt so weird. The Steelers had an offense that needed easy completions, needed rhythm, needed something over the middle, needed someone who could sit down in soft spots against zone, and somehow Pat still went long stretches where he felt like he was just another name on the call sheet instead of a player they were actively trying to feature. That is where the frustration makes sense. You can live with a player not producing if the opportunities are there and he simply does not take advantage of them. That is football. That happens. But when the player is on a contract that tells the whole league you value him, and then the weekly game plan does not really treat him like somebody you value, now you have a disconnect. And that disconnect is exactly what makes fans lose their mind, because everybody can see the logic from the outside. The offense was struggling for rhythm, struggling to sustain drives, and still one of the most reliable underneath targets was not being used as a safety blanket. Why is the paid tight end not getting a clear role? Why does it feel like the offense is always searching for answers while one of the simplest answers is already on the roster? That is not even complicated football talk. That is just common sense. The Steelers did not need Pat to become the entire identity of the offense, but they absolutely needed him to be more involved than he was. And when you hear that the people inside the building were not thrilled with it either, that confirms what a lot of people already felt. This was not just a stat problem. This was a usage problem. This was a planning problem. This was a roster building problem meeting a coaching problem, because the people building the team clearly saw Pat one way and the offense treated him another way. And once that happens, the numbers almost become predictable. If a player is not consistently on the field in the right moments, if he is not getting scripted touches, if he is not being used to attack the weak spots of a defense, then of course the production is going to look ordinary. That does not automatically mean the player is ordinary. Sometimes it means the offense never put him in position to become anything more than ordinary. That is the part that should bother people. The Steelers made the commitment first, then acted like the role could just figure itself out later. You do not pay a player and then hope the offense randomly discovers him by November. You pay him because you already have a vision for how he helps you win. That vision should have been clear from week one. Instead, Pat was being asked to survive inside an offense that never knew exactly how much it wanted him involved. That is how you waste value. That is how you pay for a player. Then act surprised when the production does not match the paycheck, even though the opportunities never match the paycheck either. And this is where the criticism of the offensive structure is completely fair, because you cannot keep talking about wanting a quarterback-friendly offense while ignoring the position that usually makes life easier. A good tight end does not need 15 targets every game to matter, but he does need rhythm, he needs packages, he needs defined looks. He needs to know there are parts of the game plan where the ball is supposed to find him, not just situations where he gets a target because everything else broke down. That is the difference between actually using a player and just having him on the field. Pat should have been built into the offense as a chain mover, a pressure answer, a red zone option, and a middle of the field stabilizer. Instead, too many times it felt like the Steelers were trying to manufacture offense from the hardest possible places while leaving the easier stuff alone. That is why this report hits a nerve. It brings up a bigger issue than one tight end stat line. It brings up the disconnect between what the Steelers say they want to be and what they actually looked like on offense. If you want to be physical, fine. Use the tight ends. If you want to protect your quarterback, fine. Use the tight ends. If you want to control games, extend drives, stay ahead of the sticks, and avoid living in long third downs, fine. Use the tight ends. That is the whole point of having players like this, but the room became messy because there were too many names and not enough clarity. Pat was there. Darnell Washington was there. Jonnu Smith was there. Connor Hayward was there. On paper, that sounds like a versatile group. In reality, it never became the advantage it should have been because the roles were not clean enough, the touches were not consistent enough, and the offense never felt like it had a real plan to make defenses pay for all those bodies. That is how a position group can look deep without actually feeling dangerous. And that is what the Steelers cannot allow. Again, you do not need to turn every tight end into a superstar. You just need each guy to have a purpose. Pat cannot just be the guy who randomly gets 4 catches when the game script gets weird. Darnell cannot just be a 6th offensive lineman who occasionally sneaks out and gets thrown a jump ball. If you are going to keep investing in this position, then the offense has to reflect that investment. And to be honest, that is why the frustration with Tomlin's management of the offense is going to come up, whether people like it or not. Maybe he was not calling every play. Maybe he was not personally deciding every snap. But he is the head coach, and when a paid offensive piece is not being maximized, the conversation eventually goes above the coordinator. That is just how it works. The Steelers have spent years trying to fix the offense with players, contracts, draft picks, and new ideas, but the structure has to help those players. Pat's numbers were not some mystery. They were connected to how often he played, how he was used, when he was targeted, and whether the offense gave him a chance to build momentum. And the red zone part is what really makes it more frustrating, because that is where tight ends can steal games. Inside the 20, the field shrinks, the outside stuff gets tighter, and a tight end working the seams, sitting over the ball, or boxing out a defender can be the difference between 6 points and another field goal. The Steelers needed that. They needed boring, reliable offense. They needed the easy button. They needed a player who could turn 2nd and 7 into 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 4 into a first down without the whole play needing to be perfect. So before anybody turns this into, well, maybe Pat just is not that guy, the fair question is simple. Did the Steelers ever really give him the kind of role that would let him prove it? Because from what this report is saying, even people in the organization did not seem convinced that they did. Now, going into 2026, this cannot be complicated anymore. The tight end room is cleaner, the excuses are thinner, and this should not turn into some fake Pat versus Darnell debate just because fans love turning every position into a cage match. The answer should be both of them. That is the whole advantage. Darnell Washington gives you the size, the blocking, the physical mismatch, the red zone body, and the kind of presence that forces defenses to think about personnel. Pat gives you the smoother receiving option, the timing underneath, the ability to sit in zones, the third down comfort, and the kind of dependable target that can help an offense stop making every possession feel like it needs a miracle. Those two skill sets should complement each other, not cancel each other out. If the Steelers are serious about fixing the offense, Mike McCarthy has to look at this situation and make it simple. Get Pat on the field more, give him specific looks, let him be part of the rhythm early instead of waiting until the second half to remember he exists. Use him near the sticks, use him in the red zone, use him when defenses start cheating outside, use Darnell to punish smaller personnel, lean on his blocking, let him become that matchup problem everybody keeps talking about, and then let Pat work off that. That is how the tight end room becomes a real weapon instead of just a list of names people talk themselves into during the offseason. And this is why 2026 is such an important year for Pat, but it is also an important year for the Steelers' offensive structure as a whole. If Pat gets real snaps, real targets, and a real weekly role and still does not produce, then fine, the conversation changes. At that point, you can say the team gave him the opportunity and he did not do enough with it. But if the usage finally matches the contract and the production jumps, then last season looks even worse because it means the Steelers had a useful piece sitting there and never properly unlocked him. That is why this story has layers. It is not just about one tight end wanting more catches. It is about whether the Steelers are finally going to align the roster with the play calling. It is about whether they are going to stop paying players for one role and then using them in another. It is about whether the offense is going to make life easier on the quarterback instead of constantly asking him to survive in obvious passing situations. And it is about whether this new setup can take the clear answers on the roster and actually turn them into production. Pat does not need to be treated like the number one weapon in football. He just needs to be treated like a player the Steelers actually believed in when they paid him. That is the bar, not unrealistic hype, not fantasy football nonsense. Just give the guy a role that makes sense. Let him build chemistry. Let him work the parts of the field where he is comfortable and stop making a simple offensive answer look like some impossible puzzle. Because if the Steelers finally do that, this tight end room can go from being one of the most frustrating parts of the offense to one of the easiest ways to stabilize everything around it. And the best part is, it does not require some massive philosophical revolution. This is not asking the Steelers to become a finesse team or throw the ball 50 times a game. It is asking them to use the players they already paid and developed in a way that actually makes sense. 2 tight end looks should help the run game, help protection, create cleaner throws, and force defenses to choose between staying big or getting exposed underneath, that should be a strength. That should be something Pittsburgh leans into. So this year, the standard cannot be vague comments about wanting Pat involved. The standard has to be visible on Sundays. More snaps, more intentional touches, more situations where the offense clearly says, we know exactly why this guy's on the field.